What's up, Facebook fam? If you're watching the broadcast, please forward to minute 4. Gonna try to get this guest going on the broadcast. So if you're watching this rebroadcast, please forward to minute 4. We're having technical difficulties as usual. Hey Anthony, do you know how to bring a guest on? We're trying to figure this out. It's the first time we've tried this. Yes. Adding. Again, if you're watching this rebroadcast, please forward to minute 4. We use this time to iron out the technical difficulties and let people join us. What's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. We're live.
Right on. Let me just get this set up. I'm on mobile now, so it's like a little bit different. Trying to get this cord out of the way here.
And you may want to turn the volume because I'm here.
Okay.
Or maybe professional put on headphones, aren't we?
Yeah, probably. But I have the iPhone that has only one port, so headphones are not an option for me. Unfortunately.
I'm sorry? Okay, guys. The rebroadcast forward to minute 4 started. I'm gonna try to get. Are you getting an echo? Pete?
No echo. You're breaking up a little bit, but other than that, it's good.
Okay. You know what I'm thinking? Because I'm getting of maybe calling you and I communicate on the phone, and then broadcast our conversation.
Bam.
Because I'm hearing incredible.
Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, real quick. I'm just gonna plug headphones in. Okay, how's this audio?
That's good. Hey,
right, I got headphones
how's our
in.
audio sound right now? Yeah, I'm not hearing any more feedback. Are you able to hear me loud and clear, Pete?
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, perfect. So this is good. If anybody is watching right now, could you let us know in the chat how the sound sounds? That'd be very much appreciated. Anthony or anybody want to help us out real quick? I don't know, Pete, if you have somebody in the chat that maybe you know that you can ask. I'm not. You know what? Let's just get this party started in 20 seconds. At this point, I'm ready to go, man. My black coffee's cold.
Sorry, we can rock and roll.
Okay. Just get my notes here. We're about to start the podcast here in about 5 seconds.
Cool.
Welcome. Today is January 19th, 2019. You are listening to Counterculture with Aaron Lujan. This is episode 32. Is the wall necessary and who's to blame for the shutdown? A conversation with Peter Diabroska, senior reporter for Big League Politics. Pete, thank you for joining me today.
What's up, Aaron? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever done a podcast before?
Several, yes.
Several. So this is
Love
the most real
podcasting.
podcast you've probably done by far, I imagine.
No, we have a new studio at our office, and we have a TriCaster in there that barely ever works. So it's always a gamble when we do a podcast too. I know how it goes.
You're too kind, man. You make me feel a lot better about myself. Well, if you guys are listening to the podcast, if you're watching this on Facebook, Pete and I just actually met electronically yesterday. I shot him a message, let him know what I was up to, and he graciously agreed to join me on the podcast today. And yeah, second guest ever. He's very generous with his time, so I definitely appreciate it. Today, as I mentioned, the title of the podcast is "The Wall Necessary and Who's to Blame for the Shutdown." My guest today is Peter De Abroska. If you're watching this live or you're watching the video broadcast, you can see him here to your right. If you're listening to the podcast, he's wearing a red hat. Is that a MAGA hat, man?
No, it's a pro-Trump coal miner pack hat that says "Make coal great again."
Oh my gosh, we're gonna get in a lot of trouble today. Peter De Abroska is an author. He's an investigative journalist from North Carolina. He is a senior reporter at BigLeaguePolitics.com. He mostly reports on immigration, the leftist media bias, and Congress. He's coming out with a book on July 16th. The title of the book is Enemies, the Press versus the American People. Wanted to ask you two quick questions before we jump into this, Pete. Why in your Twitter handle did Huffington Post call you a sophisticated fascist?
All right, well, that's a long story, but I'll shorten it for you. We did some live coverage. So we're in North Carolina, and we did some live coverage of the Antifa riots at the Silent Sam statue at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where the Antifa groups pulled that statue down. And so we would do a whole lot of reporting from like inside the mobs. And I've actually gotten like assaulted by those Antifa folks and pressed charges against them and gone to court and all this other stuff, just for reporting, for live like video reporting. And the Huffington Post, in all of their wisdom, decided that they would blame us for causing the trouble, despite the fact that we were obviously nonviolent and all of our interactions with the Antifa folks are on video. And so they called us sophisticated fascists in some article that they wrote about how it was our fault that Antifa was hitting us. It's
so
pretty
you're
incredible.
Getting hit physically by Antifa, and the Huffington Post called you the sophisticated fascist?
Correct.
Well, that's par for the course at Huffington Post, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The guy that wrote that piece writes primarily for like a local newspaper. He did like a guest piece in HuffPost, and he's actually used my video footage before in articles for his like local newspaper. And so, as a thank you for me letting him use my footage, he went and bashed me like in national platform. Thanks for that.
Oh wow. Well, you know what? Free publicity, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how the game is played. So.
And another question I had to ask you, burning question. On your Twitter cover, I see an email from Paul Avenatti to you, and the avatar is blocking a portion of the email. Can you tell me what it says completely and what is that all about?
Yeah, if you go to the mobile version of Twitter, you can see the whole email. So Avenatti had, he had put out a tweet where he like promised that Donald Trump Jr. was going to be indicted by December 31st of last year, 2018.
I remember that, yeah.
And so, of course, December 31st rolls around and Trump Jr. is walking free. And so Avenatti and I, we go back and forth on email a lot where like I kind of like ask him like annoying questions and call him out for his nonsense. And like he sends me back petulant responses. So I asked him, I was like, hey man, like what's the deal? Donald Trump Jr. hasn't been indicted yet. And he emailed me back and he said, you are an idiot. Call Donald Jr. and ask if he's about to be indicted. Now, I never called Donald Jr. I don't have Donald Jr.'s number, unfortunately. But, suffice to say, he's still free. So, and Avenatti's still wrong. So.
Yeah, and Avenatti is not going to win the presidency of the United States in 2020, apparently.
He's not even going to run. How could he? Somebody as thin-skinned as that, if you get aggravated with, questions from a reporter.
Yeah, well, also he had a little bit of a domestic violence situation come up recently. Poor guy. But no, we wish Paul the best. We hope that you come join the light, man. Come join the good guys, and just maybe stop putting out prophecies, brother. So, anyways, let's get into it, man. Obviously, like I mentioned a moment ago, you are in the thick of it. You live and breathe this stuff. This is what you do for a living. So I think there's a lot of people out there that casually follow the news, unlike yourself and myself. and are asking some really fundamental questions like, is the wall necessary? And I'm referring more to like people in the middle. I'm not talking about the super pro-Trump people or the anti-Trump people. I'm talking about what I would like to think a majority or a good third of America that really isn't either extreme. They're critical thinkers. They're open-minded. That's really what this podcast is really attempting to be, is a critical thinking, unbiased sort of recognizing when Trump does good, recognizing when Trump does bad. And I don't, like I said, I don't really know your politics. I mean, I kind of have an idea, but we'll find out here in a second. Wanted to just ask you questions about the shutdown and is the wall necessary. But before I get into it, I just wanted to give folks at home a quick timeline of what's transpired. And if I'm wrong on any of these dates, Pete, just let me know. But just to kind of get people caught up, today's January 19th. This all kind of started on December 11th when Trump demanded $5 billion for the wall. And the Democrats countered with $1.6 billion, and Trump said, I'll take the blame, right, if there's a government shutdown. And then we ended up on December 19th, where the Senate passes a continuing resolution. They called it a clean short-term funding bill, where there was no wall funding in that continuing resolution. And then jump to December 20th, Trump rejects that continuing resolution. House Republicans pass the continuing resolution with the funds for the wall. And then the next day, the Senate votes down the House version, leaving Senate Democrats to agree to funding or shut down the government. And then January 2nd, congressional leaders met with Trump. The Dems explicitly said, we're absolutely not going to give you any money for your wall. The next day, on January 3rd, the Democrats took power. They passed, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, 2 identical bills to the Senate bill that was passed earlier that does not include wall funding, and Republican senators rejected it. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then we jump forward to January 4th. Democrats asked Trump to reopen the government, and we'll fight for the wall later, kind of as an attempt to maybe meet him in the middle. And the next day, both talks on both sides broke down, and that's when Trump floated that idea of there being a national emergency. And then the January 8th, Trump and the Democrats addressed the nation, and that was gave birth to all kinds of awesome memes. I enjoyed a few of those. And they just basically restated their points. Would you agree? Kind of dug their heels in. Didn't really give any indication that either side was going to try to make a compromise or anything of that nature. And then January 9th, the White House meeting of congressional leaders ends abruptly. The next day, Trump goes to McAllen, Texas, hints again at a national emergency option to fund his wall. And then Pelosi states Trump doesn't want the wall. He just loves the distractions from his other problems. And then January 12th becomes the day that the shutdown historically becomes the longest in history. January 16th, Pelosi sends a letter to Trump to delay the State of the Union, citing security concerns. Shortly thereafter, the Department of Homeland Security responded saying that there is no security concerns. And then the following day, more memes were birthed as Trump sends a letter to Pelosi pulling security funds and military plane access. And then today, actually a few hours ago, and I think you might have written about this, Trump plans to make a major announcement, offers the Dems a limited extension, protections for people living in the U.S. with regards to DACA. And last I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, Pelosi said, no way. Is that true?
That is all accurate as far as I understand.
Okay. I like to establish the conversation based in fact. I'm not a MAGA wearing guy. I'm a free thinking guy. And so I'm really trying to appeal to folks that perhaps, haven't really maybe made up their mind and just want to get to the truth of the matter. So my question to you is, what have the consequences been thus far with the government shutdown? What do you know about the aftermath?
Well, the biggest sort of ramification of the government shutdown so far has been the fact that certain federal government employees are not getting paid. Now, there's 25% of the government is shut down, so it's not the whole federal government. They shut down what they call non-essential government employees, which is an interesting term, right? Because you never hear of non-essential employees in the private sector.
Yeah.
That wouldn't exist, right?
Right.
Those non-essential government employees include the Transportation Security Administration, right? So the TSA, the airport, and air traffic controllers, and that seems to be sort of the biggest rub for the political left. You haven't heard much about, like, random executive administration contractors who aren't getting paid, right? Because those aren't sexy stories for the media. You have heard about the air traffic controller who's working tirelessly to keep you safe while you fly, who's not getting paid, right? Um, as far as I understand, the most negative ramification has been that some people who do serve a valuable purpose, like air traffic controllers, and I suppose like TSA, though TSA could be privatized very easily.
Sure.
Those people are not getting paid at the moment. They will receive back pay though, which is important to note. So eventually, when this shutdown ends, they're going to get all the money. It's just
Yep.
a question of, the fact that they're not getting paid now. That's what the Dems are really angry about. Other than that, we're all still alive. The government is still the government. It's not like we're gonna all perish suddenly
So
because
what you're telling
25%
me,
of the
Pete,
federal
is,
government is gone. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to clarify what you just said. So that means that non-essential employees are the only ones that are having their pay delayed, that most of the essential functions of the government is still in order. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what the federal government deems to be essential versus non-essential, I'm not sure how they make that decision,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's accurate.
Okay.
Um,
And generally, what you found out it to be are TSA. My understanding is the Food and Drug Administration. My understanding is the Forest Services that clean up the federal
sure.
parks.
Hmm.
Some folks have been saying that if this shutdown continues, and part of the fear that's being parlayed in the media is that 38 million Americans may lose food stamps, 6 million may not receive their tax refunds, 2 million without rental assistance may face eviction. The parks, museums, and airports will continue to deteriorate. The federal court systems will come to a halt, and disaster relief money will be diverted from storm ravaged areas. Is that accurate? Do you foresee that being the case if this continues?
I mean, look, there's going to be doomsday scenarios about what will happen without the federal government. But the fact of the matter is, most of the federal government is overbearing. Most of it is unnecessary. The agencies that we have in place that people might think are necessary are too large. They don't serve the original functions that they were supposed to serve. I don't think those doomsday predictions are necessarily accurate. There's going to be a lot of scaremongering in the media. That's what they do best, to try and force the hand of the Republican president, right? Um, all in all, we've gone what is it, 25 days, 28 days now
Yeah.
with the quarter of the federal government being shut down, and we're all still alive. I mean, if people have to scrape by for a month or 2 months or 3 months, well, sorry to hear that, right? But there are also plenty of jobs available in the private sector thanks to President Trump and the economy, which is roaring, right? So um, I hate to sound callous and say get a real job, but get a real job.
Well, it's funny that you say that because there has been rumor, not like talk about maybe people should rethink about federal government, and there's been a lot of soul searching of the federal government employees making the decision. Well, maybe the private sector is more reliable, and and so maybe this is the silver lining in this situation, that federal employees won't rely on the government for employment, that they'll seek employment in the private sector, perhaps.
I hope so. Keep in mind this is what tends to get lost in this debate is that you and I pay their salaries via taxation, right?
Yeah.
So when you send 40% of your paycheck to the federal government, that's paying their salaries. They're complaining that you are not paying their salaries. Nobody in the private sector has that luxury, right?
Yeah.
If you lose your job or if you get temporarily laid off or whatever the case is, you can't blame anybody.
Yeah.
So the fact that the federal government gets to do that on yours and my dime is what aggravates the conservative crowd who sort of advocates for smaller government in the first place, right? We're like, if you're really non-essential, we really don't need you. Why should you complain? Yeah.
So there's a lot of fear mongering. A lot of the doomsday scenarios is all about fear. You're saying the government's too bloated, too big, anyways, and it's the unfortunate thing is that people are going without pay. but you're not overly concerned with the shutdown or it even continuing because of your core belief that the government in general is just not really serving any purpose to begin with. Is that a fair assessment of your
It's
take?
like, it's pretty accurate. I hope the shutdown lasts forever, and I hope that all of the unnecessary executive branch agencies are completely cut. And the ones that we need, they can stay. But as far as I'm concerned, the federal government shouldn't be involved in 90% of the things it's involved with. All of those executive branch agency functions could all be dissolved to the states, and we would never have these problems ever. The government shutdown would not be able to be used as a political tool as it is right now, and as it was when President Obama wanted to pass the Affordable Care Act, right?
Yeah.
If the federal government wasn't so big and so bloated, and if all of these functions that aren't, the federal government under the Constitution is not supposed to be involved with anyways, were devolved to the states.
Interesting. I find that fascinating because I came from the 2008 Ron Paul Liberty movement, and the crux of that movement was shrinking the size of government, and that the constitutional role, as it was intended by the founders, was to keep the government incredibly small and only serve a very, very few core functions. And one of those key functions is national security and protecting our
Correct.
borders. And ironically, if you agree with this, the one constitutional function of federal government is actually what's being challenged right now, which is the president's ability to keep his oath and defend our borders. So my question to you is the wall necessary?
Yes, absolutely, the wall is necessary.
Why?
Well, so okay, there's a bunch of reasons, right? But I don't know if you've ever been to Borderlands or not. I think you live out west,
Yeah,
way further west than I do, right?
yeah.
If you've ever been to Borderland, there are literally I should say hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles of wide open terrain where if you live within walking distance of the United States border, you can simply come here. I mean, that's like the criteria for immigration. If you live in the Southwest, or if you live near the American Southwest, the only criteria for you to immigrate to the United States, if you live near the American Southwest, is to be able to walk across the border. That's it. So a physical barrier would obviously impede people from doing that. Um, this idea that walls don't work, right? That a physical barrier would not stop people from crossing is absolutely absurd, right? If you look at what they did in Israel, if you look at what they do all over the world, there's a border between Turkey and Syria that we paid for, or that the European Union paid for, right? But these same like pro big government liberal types want to tell you that a wall won't work. Well, of course, a wall will work, right? So we need it to keep undesirables out. We need it because we need a sane immigration policy in this country, which we do not have. So here's the thing: we have 2,000 criminal illegal aliens a year who are arrested in this country who have been charged or convicted with homicide at some point while being here. Every year. That's 2,000 people who have been charged or convicted with homicide.
Wow.
That are arrested, criminal illegal aliens. You have like 16,000 people a year that die from overdoses of deadly drugs that pour across the border, right? People say, well, border wall might not stop drugs. Well, it might not stop drugs completely, but it would help,
Sure.
right? All of this is part of a sane immigration policy, a policy that allows America to protect its sovereign borders. And the fact that Democrats are against this shows that they are insane. I really do believe that. At least the radical ones, right? The ones that are really against this, the wall's racist thing. No, the wall is not racist. Everybody has a wall. Everybody has an immigration policy. Why can't the greatest country on earth have one? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So yes, in brief, we do need a wall.
Okay. And Pete, I'm gonna just play devil's advocate because I think it's important to do so because it really, I think, pulls out the arguments that are pertinent. One of them is people are saying, well, who cares about a wall? We could just build tunnels. A wall would be ineffective because Mexican cartels are notorious for building tunnels, or we've also all those sawed open. Um, Maybe in areas where, well, let me just stop there. What do you say to folks who say a wall would be ineffective because they can just saw it open or build a tunnel?
Yeah, so here's the thing about tunnels. Go ahead, build your tunnel, right? Right now we have 3,000 people crossing the border illegally daily. Okay? Yeah, I don't know how many tunnels it would take to match that number, but I would imagine it would be like in the hundreds, and it would take a whole bunch of time and manpower to be able to dig underneath that wall and get as many illegal immigrants through a tunnel into the United States uh, as we have crossing the border currently today, right now, because it's wide open. So go on, build your tunnel, right? I don't think anybody really is making the argument that a wall is going to be an absolute like end to illegal immigration, right? Nobody's saying this is going to stop all illegal immigrants. This is going to stop all drugs. Nobody's saying that.
Mm-hmm.
What we are saying is it's going to be a significant barrier to this type of behavior, right?
Okay. Are you concerned, civil libertarians and some people on the right, if you will, have argued that a wall can also serve a dual purpose, that it could keep people in? And let's take a scenario where we have a Democratic president to the likes of Obama, who maybe has a taste for tyranny. Wouldn't a wall could also be used nefariously to keep people in an event that they're trying to get out of the country?
I mean, I don't plan on fleeing to Mexico anytime soon. To be fair, to be frank, I mean, I can't envision a situation where a wall at the southern border would keep me from leaving.
Okay.
I mean, you know, what if I mean, are we talking about a situation where I can't get a plane and, you know, go to Europe or anywhere else in the world? We're talking about a situation where, like, you know, flights are grounded. If that's the case, nobody's going to be able to leave regardless of whether there's a wall or not. You know what I mean?
Good
Except
point.
for maybe a few people who live in New Mexico and Arizona.
No. That's a
So,
fair point, and that actually answers because that was a sincere question on my part
yeah.
as a civil libertarian. And another argument was that why would you build a physical wall across the entire southern border? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, the president's proposal is to build a wall at every inch of the southern border, and opponents of the wall, some of them on the right, have argued that there's huge portions of the southern border that nobody's crossing anyways, and
Mm-hmm.
that it would be pointless. And if you were to build a wall, it would they by the time they took to saw it or jump it, they would already be across before agents could even respond. So why would it be wise to build a wall across the entire southern border in light of what I just brought up?
Sure. And so I think actually he addressed this today in his proposal that he made to the Democrats. Trump did when he said that that immediately they wanted to secure portions of the border that aren't sort of like treacherous, that don't have like treacherous terrain, mountains that are difficult to climb, and so forth. Um, to answer your question, I mean, do you need a wall to go across all 2,000 miles of that southern border? Probably not, right? And you know, if 100 illegal aliens are willing to make a treacherous trek across, you know, thousands-mile high mountains and, you know, rough terrain to get here, I'm fine with that, right? Like this again, it goes back to like sort of we're talking about a limiting principle here. We're not talking about a wall stopping every single illegal immigrant from ever coming here, you know. So no, I don't. I mean, ultimately, I don't think there will ever be a wall across all 2,000 miles. Nor do I think that it's 100% necessary.
So is the president proposing a wall across all 2,000 miles, or is he?
Today, he said that at least in like the immediate, his offer today was at least in the immediate future to build a wall in areas that the Border Patrol says are the most heavily crossed areas. So I would assume that does not include like mountainous terrain where people would have to work really hard to.
So as late as today, the implication is that he will not necessarily cover all 2,000 miles, only the key critical areas as identified by Border Patrol.
I would say that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's encouraging, because that was one of my biggest questions as far as the wall. It just seemed like a waste of money for areas that have nominal crossings to begin with. Can you talk to me a little bit about the crisis at the border and the reason for it? You said it's necessary. You brought up some really good points about preserving national sovereignty. You talked about the drugs. You talked about the Hamas people who are guilty charged of murder. I mean, we obviously don't. We have enough American murderers. We don't need foreign ones. Um, can you give me some more detail? I've heard instances of rape. I've heard instances of child human trafficking. How bad is it down there? And what else would you say about the crisis at the border?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things to note is that illegal aliens are notorious for committing two other crimes besides drug dealing and besides homicide. Illegal aliens are especially notorious for drunk driving. This happens on a regular basis where they drunk drive and get in car accidents and kill entire families of people. If you need source material on that, you should read Adios America by Ann Coulter. Fantastic breakdown in that book uh, of how illegal aliens commit crimes in America. Second, and really unfortunate criminal activity that illegal aliens have a propensity for is child molestation, child rape. And I write about these stories like 2 or 3 times a week.
I saw that.
And so when I sit here and I hear the Democrats saying this is not a crisis, I wonder to myself, well, how many more child rapes before it becomes a crisis? To that point, all of the passable area south of the border in Mexico is controlled by drug cartels. That's what Trump's talking about when he says coyotes. He's not talking about the animal. I just want to make that clear for those who don't know.
We know it down here in the Southwest.
Yeah, of course, right? But like some people on the East Coast, I see people flipping out on Twitter, like, what is he talking about coyotes for?
They're from North Carolina, man. They don't know about that.
it's weird, man. Anyhow, so all of the that borderlands down there that's passable, where illegal aliens cross, is all controlled by cartels. And so the price that a lot of families pay to have their kids especially smuggled across the border is that they allow the cartel members to have their way with their children, particularly young females. And so Border Patrol agents often tell this story, and I've written several stories on this too. They find like young girls traveling with birth control. And Trump talked about this in his speech today too, actually, to his credit. They find young girls traveling with birth control because rape is like an expected part of the smuggling process. I mean, if that's not a humanitarian crisis in itself, I don't know what is, and so, that's a price you have to pay. Everybody, regardless of, whether you're a young woman or not, has to deal with these hugely dangerous drug cartels to pass through, right? I mean, it's totally lawless there. These drug cartels have a habit of beheading people. Mexico is the beheading capital of the world. I mean, it's not Syria. It's not, Pakistan. So what?
It's not ISIS-controlled territories.
It's not. It is Mexico.
Wow.
Right, and it's the cartels that behave this way, and everybody who comes. I mean, I don't know for a fact that everybody who comes here gets smuggled by a cartel or comes through a cartel, but I know that borderland is largely controlled by cartels. So to put people in the hands of those dangerous animals in order to come here, it is a humanitarian crisis.
Is it worth shutting down the government for?
Say what?
Is it worth shutting down the government for that?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think, there's very few things that you could convince me it's not worth shutting the government down for, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of the federal government as a whole.
So you see it more as a bargaining chip. You see a huge crisis at the border. It's not even that much of a concern with the exception of the furloughed employees. This is all very interesting. I don't think a lot of people have thought about some of the perspectives that you're bringing up, and you're definitely appealing to my libertarian inclination of a small government. And maybe I was buying too much into the hype that the media was putting out there about the devastation of this government shutdown. You're arguing that it's not as bad as it's being played out in the media. Is that right?
Yeah, I would argue that nothing is ever as bad as the media says it is, especially this. I mean, look, it's a perfect narrative for them, right? They get to bring on the sobbing middle-aged woman who says that she can't pay her rent. And while that is unfortunate, there are plenty of sobbing middle-aged women in the private sector who cannot pay their rent, right? The only reason they're bringing these people on now is because they can hit Donald Trump with it. When the government was shut down so that Obama could pass the Affordable Care Act, ABC, CBS, NBC, all these people, they didn't have any sobbing furloughed federal government employees on their air. Why not? right?
Yeah.
It's because the media is a tool of the Democratic Party, right? It's not
Yeah.
honest. It's not fair.
No, that makes perfect sense. So, I wanted to ask you who's to blame for the shutdown, Pete. But before I do that, let me just preface the question by saying that, um, the Dems have been accused of not having any concern for border security, but there was a counteroffer on December 11th. There was also one on January 3rd, and then today, in good faith, the president made I guess, a concession, if you will, with regards to DACA recipients if they would approve his the funds for the wall. Do you believe, Pete, that the Democrats have either on the 11th of December, the 3rd of January, um, made good faith proposals? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so none of these proposals are made in good faith. And it's important to note that it's not just Democrats who have made these bad faith proposals. It's establishment GOP types too. Okay, they've been doing this for decades where they say, give us money for border security, right? And they say that very generally. They never say what border security means. And if you press them on it, they'll say, well, more technology, more agents, more this and that. Nobody ever talks about a physical barrier. That's what the Democrats are doing right now, right? There's recycling that generic talking point of, we'll give you more border security, right? And Trump is like, well, no, we don't want more border security. We want a wall, right?
Yeah.
That is the border security. So I don't think that they're in good faith trying to make a deal for a wall. So that's, to me, I mean, that's how I see it playing out. But keep in mind, and I want people to know this, that the establishment GOP on border security is just as bad as the liberal Democrat side, and always has been, because these large GOP business people, right, and their gigantic Wall Street donors, they profit immensely from illegal immigration because they get cheap labor, right? So it's like, if you've got the Wall Street guy who owns a conglomerate, and part of his conglomerate owns, I don't know, manufacturing firms or agricultural industry stuff, and he can pay an illegal immigrant $5 an hour in cash. Well, he's going to go talk to somebody like Marco Rubio of the GOP establishment, give Marco Rubio a ton of money, and say, hey, Marco, can you promise the Americans border security and not actually give it to them because I want to keep my cheap labor, right? So this is a talking point that they use over and over and over again. Republicans are responsible for this too, GOP one. That's why Donald Trump was elected. I mean, what was the whole Trump campaign? It was build the wall, right?
Yeah, that was his campaign.
Yeah.
So is the implication that more agents and more technology is necessary and it's all about the wall, or would you agree that additional technology and agents is something that should be included?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it couldn't hurt, right? It couldn't hurt to have drones. It couldn't hurt to have more drug sniffing dogs. It couldn't hurt to have more agents. But the fact is, the cartels are going to outsmart all of these people. The cartels have all the time in the world to figure out how to beat the manpower, right? You can't beat a wall. I mean, I mean, if there's a wall in your way, in your path, you're not gonna be able to get around it, regardless of what you do. So, yeah, I mean, as a supplement to the wall, sure, always, more drones, more dogs, more border agents. Give me all of that, absolutely. But let's build the wall first.
Okay. So bottom line is, it's all about the wall, and you're saying that the Dems really, and establishment GOP types are really not making any sort of good faith border security proposals because it does not include the wall. Am I hearing you correctly?
Correct. And I think this is probably a good segue into your next question. The reason why the GOP didn't pass border wall legislation when it controlled the House and the Senate for the last 2 years is because they didn't have enough support from GOP people.
Yeah.
I mean, they definitely didn't have 60 votes in the Senate, right? So they're partially to blame for this too.
Sure. And one could argue that there's GOP Republicans. There's all kinds of different Republicans, right?
Yes.
Democrats are, yeah. So the other question that I had is, do you think Americans want the wall built and are willing to keep the government shut down? Because mainstream media is touting polls that are saying that the American people are growing tired of the shutdown and that they would rather have their checks and rather see their 800,000 federal employee neighbors be able to stop being furloughed and get some of these agencies back up again. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that those are more lies from the media?
I think that people may be growing tired of the shutdown, but I'm looking for this article that I wrote
Sure.
here
And I'm
that
listening. I'm
shows.
just grabbing some juice from my phone. One sec.
Yeah, sure. I might have to do the same thing in a minute, actually. Um, I'm looking for a poll. I'm looking for a piece that I wrote here last week that showed that polls had support for the border wall at an all-time high. It was a Harvard, no, it was an ABC WAPO poll. Let me see if I can find it.
Sure. And while you're looking for that, is it? Do you think it's a lie though, or you think it could be
That
true?
that the American people are growing tired of the shutdown. I think that's possible that
Yeah.
they're growing tired of the shutdown. I think the American people are growing tired of politics just in general, right?
Sure.
And they wish that like the government would at least try and pretend like it can, get along with itself.
Uh-huh.
But the polls that I saw, and I'm trying to pull it up here. Here we go. Support for the border wall soars among swing voters. The poll that I saw, it says that 42% of Americans now support a border wall, whereas the last poll a year ago showed that only 34% supported a border
And what
wall.
source was that?
Say what?
What source? Which
That's an ABC and Washington Post poll.
ABC and the CIA Washington Post. That's pretty interesting.
So,
That's pretty
yeah,
interesting because you would, if they're saying that, it's probably a lot higher than what they're saying, right?
yeah. Considering that they usually oversample Democrats, absolutely.
Wow. So the takeaway there is we can probably be pretty confident that there's more support for the wall across the country now than there was before. I'm
Indeed, a year ago, yeah,
a year
absolutely.
ago, and I'm also hearing that some freshman Democrats are open to the wall and willing to negotiate. Is that true?
Yeah, I wrote a piece on that too. Breitbart had that first, but the freshman Dems are not playing along with Pelosi. This is kind of a part of the game that Trump is playing here. We should probably talk about this briefly. Trump made that deal for amnesty today, or that offer for amnesty today, knowing that Nancy Pelosi would not take it because she can't possibly show any weakness in this brand new term as speaker, right?
Sure.
So she couldn't give in to Trump today. But on the back end, she has the freshman Democrats who want to give in to Trump and who are pushing her in the other direction towards him, right? So it's actually a really smart play on his behalf. Now, personally, since I'm an illegal immigration hardliner, I'm not cool with toying around with the idea of amnesty at all. So I was unhappy that he even offered it. But I mean, when you think about the politics behind it, it made a lot of sense.
Sure. He's a deal maker, right?
Sure. Yeah.
He's a deal maker, and I think it would be unfair to call Trump a hardliner. I don't think at any point, I mean, the media tries to portray him as a neo-Nazi, um, but the reality, outside of the sci-fi, fantasy, mainstream media world, is that he's really a deal maker, appealing to a conservative base. I don't think he's genuinely a hardline right winger, if you will. Or if he was, I don't think he would have ever made the offer to concede on DACA.
That's right. Well, he's not. He's not a hardline conservative. You may have noticed. I read about this a little bit in my book, but you may have noticed during the primaries when Trump was running for president, the big media narrative was, "There's no way Trump can win. He's not conservative enough." And then he like took them by storm. And as soon as he won the primary, the narrative completely flipped 180 to Trump's a neo-Nazi and he's like a white supremacist and he's as far right as they come and he's the worst human being on earth.
Funny
I
how
mean,
they
to
made the
explain.
switch, huh?
Explain to me how that happens. It's just ridiculous.
Well, to the benefit of the mainstream media, I think that the general public has the attention span and memory of about 3 weeks.
Yeah, most people don't care. That's right. And the news cycle moves so fast that they can't care.
Yeah,
I mean, like most people who just, who don't do this for a living, right?
yeah. It's like I remember in the old days when the Democrats used to be anti-war. Remember that?
Yeah. You mean like 3 years ago?
3 years
Yeah, I
ago.
remember that.
Remember
Yeah.
back in the old days when Obama ran on "We're going to get out of Iraq," and he was the answer to the George W. Bush years of endless war, and then now the left seems to be pro-war, and we're criticizing Trump for his troop withdrawal in Syria. Um,
Pretty insane.
yeah, it's insane. I think a lot of independents are starting to wake up to this contradiction, and are starting to push, I think, moderates, if you will, and independents to the right. Do you think that that could be true?
Um, I don't know if they're coming to the right. I think that if they're coming towards Donald Trump, that means they're probably coming towards the center, because
Okay.
like we said, he's not this like far right nut job that people want to make him out to be. What's really happening in America is we're having a populist revolution, right? Um, so, I mean, people who pay attention to this stuff closely might have noticed that there were a lot of crossover voters from people who voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary to people who voted for Donald Trump, right? It's the message really is not so much about
Right versus
your traditional politics as it is about taking power away from the government, putting it back in the hands of the people, right?
Would you label it class warfare?
No, not necessarily. Um, I just think that people realize that there are like elite institutions in this country that don't have to play by the rules, which include politicians and big business. And then there are you and I. There is you and I, the regular people, right? The ordinary people who do have to play by the rules, and the normal person recognizes that that's not right. Um, and so I don't know that there's necessarily class warfare, but then back to what you were talking about before. It's like one of the main jobs of the government is to protect the people, right? I mean, that's what the Constitution says. Um, so I'm not a huge fan of government intervention in a lot of areas, but one area that I am a fan of government intervention in would be trust busting, right?
You
Busting
what?
up be trust busting, like by busting up these gigantic businesses, these monopolies.
Oh,
I mean, you can't,
antitrust. Yeah.
yeah, you can't. I mean, I can't name a single industry that is not monopolized by 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 companies, right? So if the government is really interested in protecting the people, and this is something they should be doing, right? They should be breaking up these gigantic companies in tech and in banking and in healthcare. Um, so that's a place where I would support government intervention, but they're not doing it. So it's kind of like what you were saying earlier, right? The government seems to be intervening in places where it shouldn't be, and not intervening in places where it should be. At least in my opinion.
No, I agree with that. To definitely agree with that. So, um, Trump's well accused of being bad policy. Um,
Um,
Pete, are you able to hear me?
Pete, are you able to hear? Yes.
Okay, I just started getting. Okay.
Am I echoing?
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm.
You're not.
You're not.
Is
Okay. Cool.
Are you
Are you
hearing an echo for me?
hearing an echo for me? Nope.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
we're almost towards the end.
We're almost towards the end. So I'm gonna very best
From my echo.
from our echo.
So what is the?
So what is the?
I believe
I believe
involved with
involved with
torture,
torture,
earmarked for
earmarked for the
arrest,
technology,
immigration,
immigration reform,
including the
including the
removes, the
mag
that bring
legal
and improving the legal process. I have family members who have waited 10 plus years to come here legally, and that's just a joke. That's ridiculous. No one should have to wait that long. That's my own humble solution to this problem as I sit here as a peasant, as a mere peasant. What would be your solution? Is it Trump's solution, or would you add to that?
Sure. So I think that, bottom line, we need to start with a merit-based immigration system, right? So, um, I mean, that's how every sane first world country on earth does it. If you want to come here, you have to bring a skill set along with you, right? So we need to fill tech jobs, let's fill tech jobs. We need to fill engineering jobs, let's fill engineering jobs. We need doctors, let's get the best doctors in the world, and so forth. In terms of family members of those people, to me it's insane that we have chain migration right now for illegals, but not for legal aliens. I mean, it's nuts, right? So I haven't thought about this too deeply, but if we ever get to a point in this country where we have a sane legal immigration policy, it seems to me that it would make sense that the people who immigrate here legally would at least be able to bring some close friends, or close family members. I mean, not close friends. It would be a little tough, but at least like close family members, immediate
Sure.
family, right?
Yeah.
But I really do think that the solution is merit-based immigration. It's bring a skill, and if you have a skill that we need, then you're more than welcome to come here. Nobody is anti-immigrant. This is another thing that the mainstream press does a lot. They like to call especially the political right, anti-immigrant. I mean, that's a blatant falsehood, right? And it's subtle, and they pass it by a lot of people. But nobody that I know is anti-immigrant. Everybody that I
I
know.
married an immigrant.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So you're not anti-immigrant.
No, definitely not.
Nobody's anti-immigrant. Everybody that I know is anti-illegal immigrant, right? And
Sure,
there's a big difference there,
sure.
right? Got a little anecdote for you. My folks who are retired, they went on a safari to Botswana, which is a third world country in Africa. And they stayed in it's my understanding, basically a hut, like a tribal reservation type area with sort of what you would imagine to be the traditional Botswana tribe
I
of
see where you
people.
get your bravery from, Pete.
So I guess so. I don't know. So anyhow, they were there with a Parisian couple, a couple from Paris, right? And they were sitting around at a dinner table with the tribal leader, who apparently is weighted on hand and foot by the people. That's kind of cool. Anyways,
Yeah.
and they started talking about Trump, because Trump is the topic of discussion for the world,
In
right?
Botswana.
In Botswana, right? And the Parisian couple was kind of turning their nose up at him, he's the ugly American and immigration and so forth. Do you know what this tribal leader in third world Botswana said to this Parisian couple in front of my folks?
No.
He said, nobody comes to Botswana unless we want them to come to Botswana. He said, if you come here and you're not bringing anything, we kick you out. I mean, we're talking about a third world. We're talking about a nation that doesn't have running water, okay? And they have a more sane policy of immigration than we do. Think about that. It's nuts.
No, I think about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's all I got. That's my anecdote.
No, that's very interesting, and it makes me think about the southern border of Mexico to Guatemala. My understanding is that there's a wall, there's military soldiers with full auto, basically pointing weapons at the Guatemalans. And I happen to be close to people that live in Tijuana and Baja, and they were incredibly upset that they had all of these Honduran and Nicaraguan and Central American people in their country. And I watched many interviews in Spanish with Mexican nationals in Tijuana, complaining about how they were ungrateful. They were upset with their government that they were let in. And I don't think for a second did the American mainstream media at any point call Mexicans racist against Guatemalans, Hondurans, and Nicaraguans. But
They
yet
did not.
they don't. But when Americans complain about foreign nationals coming in illegally and creating problems in their country, they're immediately racist.
Right, absolutely.
So I think it's pretty obvious that it's identity politics at play. Would you agree?
I do agree. And I would like to point out that I don't care if you're black, white, blue, green, or orange. If you're an illegal alien, I don't want you here. You know what I mean? I want you to leave and come back legally. Right? I mean, there are tons of illegal white immigrants. They need to go too. You know what I mean? I myself am an Arab, majority Arab, of Arab descent. I'm a third generation American. But it doesn't matter what your race is. That's not what this debate is about. This debate is about whether we are allowed as a nation to have sovereign borders. And if we're not, then I don't really think we have a nation anyways. So
why is the establishment media and the Democratic Party opposed to true border security?
Well, the Democratic Party wants to import voters en masse because their policies are so radical that they couldn't win elections otherwise. And by the way, they're very successful at doing this. They're doing a great job. And if we let illegal immigration go, this is why this is the number one issue of our time. If we let the immigration policy go as it's going right now, Republicans, by 2028 will never win another election, right? Because Democrats will have imported so many foreign voters who they will allow to vote. Don't think that they won't for a second, and who will vote for socialist, radical leftist policies that they're fleeing from in their home countries.
And they'll vote 3 times. Right.
Yes, and they'll vote 3 times. Republicans, like I mentioned before, they love illegal immigration too. Like the Koch brothers, gigantic, right-wing donors. We need to put them on blast. Okay, these people love illegal immigration because it provides them with cheap labor, which allows them to grow their profit margins. Right. So
it sounds to me like the debate isn't so much left versus right. It's populism versus establishment, or populism.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is why Tucker Carlson he sort of I don't know, poked a hole in the matrix when he did that monologue a couple weeks ago, where he basically called out all of the plutocratic elites on both sides. And, he had the left going nuts, and he had the Ben Shapiro types on the right going nuts, Conservative Inc. or, the true conservative sort of establishment GOPers going nuts, because he's discussing what you and I are discussing right now, the fact that it's not really about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It's about whether the policies that our government is enacting are good for the people of this country, right? It's like, is the government actually serving us? And I think that most of us, left or right, would probably argue no, it's not.
It's
So
a basic and fundamental idea that was common sense up until maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Is the government working for the best interest of the people? But it sounds to me like we've been pulled into this ridiculous left versus right paradigm that we can't even seem to be able to see outside of the box that we've been put in. And what you're saying is that Tucker Carlson kind of, I like what you said, poked a hole in the matrix and sort of let the cat out the bag and sort of reminded us of really the true battlefield that we're engaged in, which is a populist president who was elected sort of as a message to the elites that we're done with the open borders, we're done with the monopolies, we're done with big government, we're done with the endless wars, and we want our country back. Would that
that's
be
right.
a fair way of putting it?
100%.
Very interesting. Well, I'm gonna let you go, Pete. It's truly been a blessing to have you on the show. I would love to have you back someday if you wouldn't mind. I might have scared you with all my technical problems, though, right?
No, absolutely. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I
Good.
appreciate you having me on, and happy to come back whenever.
Thank you. Do you mind just closing us out? Tell us a little bit about your book and how people can find you.
Sure, absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at P. Dabrowska. That's where I do most of my sharing of stories. I also am starting a Facebook page because my agent tells me that that's smart. It has like 68 likes right now. So if you want to help me get up to, maybe 100 or something, that'd be cool.
Sure.
That's just Peter Dabrowska.
Yeah.
My book is coming out. It's being published through Post Hill Press, which is the same publishing company that published Dan Bongino's Spygate, which is I don't know if it was a #1 bestseller, but it definitely made the bestseller list. You should definitely check that book out. But my book, Enemies, The Press versus the American People, will be out on July 16th. It'll be available for pre-order somewhere probably around a month before that. You could buy it on Amazon and in Barnes & Noble and potentially Books A Million. I'm not sure about that yet, though.
That's amazing. So Enemies, The Press versus the American People, coming out July 16th. Add it to your wish list on Amazon. Get down to Barnes & Nobles in the summertime. I'm definitely going to pick up a copy. Maybe you can come on in the summertime and when the book's out and we can help promote it. And by then, I'm sure you'll have 6 billion followers on Facebook by then.
I'm not sure about that, but yes, happy to join whenever.
Pete, take care, brother. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.